Hi, everybody. I am here with a different kind of video today. Different for me, at least. I am going to talk a little bit about the New Hampshire presidential primary that is coming up in a couple weeks. I'll start off by saying that this video will not endorse or express any kind of support for any candidates of either side. I obviously have my own personal political opinions and political leanings, but this is just going to look objectively at the primary, at some of the procedures and traditions involved, the past winners, and I'm going to make some predictions about the winners this time around, but just what I think is going to happen, not necessarily what I hope is going to happen. So, yeah, I spent a good part of my life living in New Hampshire, so I was very fortunate to get to go to some political events and meet some of the presidential candidates. One thing that's cool about the primary process in New Hampshire is that it is a relatively small, quite small geographically, and also not very well populated compared to other states. So it's an interesting place to start the primary process because candidates get an opportunity to have a lot of face time with voters. Candidates will go into diners and coffee shops and other local businesses and just talk to voters who are going about their lives and try to convince them they are ready for the job of president. And there are, of course, also town halls and other more planned events where you can ask the candidates questions and get to meet them afterward. So it's something I look forward to, even though I don't live in New Hampshire currently. It's something I look forward to following and seeing the results of every 4 years. A couple interesting things about the process. It's actually relatively easy to get on the ballot in New Hampshire. Any person can run for president just by paying a $1,000 filing fee or collecting the signatures of 10 registered voters in each county and completing a pretty simple declaration form that just declares that you meet the constitutional requirements to be president, which is, of course, being at least 35 years of age, a natural-born citizen of the United States, and a U.S. resident for at least 14 years. So, yeah, that's why you end up seeing a lot of candidates on the New Hampshire primary ballot that you have probably never heard of before, because it's not that hard to get on. So a lot of people will just, I guess, for the kick of it, decide to run for president. I'm not sure how many are actually under the impression that they could become president, but I guess you never know. You got to be on the ballot first. So, for example, we look at the Republican ballot this time around. This is the, at least theoretically, more competitive party because there is not an incumbent running, although former President Donald Trump is running again. So we see his name on the ballot. Other prominent candidates are Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, Ron DeSantis, the current governor of Florida, and Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey. He also ran back in 2016, ultimately losing the nomination to Donald Trump. There aren't too many funny names on this one that I see, but if we look over at the Democratic ballot, for example, we have President R. Body. That is his legal name, or at least legal name as it appears on the ballot. Paperboy Love Prince is running for president. Paperboy Love Prince. Vermin Supreme. He's on almost every year, I think. He's a very funny looking guy. He wears a boot on his head. And so, yeah. One name absent from the ballot is President Joe Biden. Joe Biden is running for a second term, but he's actually not appearing on the ballot in New Hampshire because there was some controversy with the DNC scheduling the New Hampshire primary after South Carolina, and I think maybe after Nevada as well. And it says in the New Hampshire state constitution that New Hampshire must be first. So New Hampshire scheduled the primary earlier than what the DNC asked them to do. And I guess as a sort of protest, or not really recognizing the legitimacy of the primary, Joe Biden is not appearing on the ballot. So we'll see if voters end up writing him in. Other candidates running include Marianne Williamson, an author who ran for the nomination in 2020 that Biden ultimately won, and Dean Phillips, a congressman from Minnesota, is also challenging Biden for the nomination. So it'll be interesting to see if Biden not being on the ballot, allows one of these other candidates to emerge as a contender. A couple other cool things, or at least one other cool thing about the New Hampshire primary is that some communities vote at midnight on the day of the primary, so they are the first primary voters to cast a ballot in the country. Most notably is the Dixville Notch, which is located at the very northern part of New Hampshire, only a few miles from the Canadian border, I'm pretty sure. And I think the official population is usually only like 12 people or something like that. So those folks get to be the very first people at midnight on the day of the primary to cast their ballot. Another kind of cool tradition in the New Hampshire primary. So I'm going to look real quick at the past winners of the New Hampshire primaries, just going back to 1992, so about 8 election cycles worth of primaries. And I'll start with the Democrats. So in 1992, Paul Tsongas won the Democratic primary in New Hampshire with 33% of the vote. But Bill Clinton came in a pretty competitive second with 25%, and that, I think in a lot of people's mind, was the real launch of his candidacy and sort of propelled him to ultimately get the nomination in 1992. So sometimes a strong second place finish is enough to change the conversation around the race. And more on that later. But just sticking with the Democrats, in 1996, Clinton was the incumbent, so he won with 84% of the vote, no problem. Skipping ahead to 2000, Al Gore, who ultimately got the nomination, won with 50% of the vote. Bill Bradley actually came in a pretty close second with 46%. It's pretty rare, I feel like, that there's only two major candidates in a primary that's held this early on. And all other candidates only got 4%. In 2004, John Kerry, who also ultimately became the Democratic nominee, won the New Hampshire primary with 38% of the vote. Howard Dean came in second at 26%, and General Wesley Clark came in third, tied with John Edwards, I guess. They both finished with around 12%. I'm guessing Clark maybe finished with a few more tenths of a percent if he's listed first, but yeah, looking ahead to 2008, Hillary Clinton actually won the New Hampshire primary, even though Barack Obama ultimately got the nomination. So Hillary Clinton had 39%, Barack Obama 36%, and John Edwards in kind of a distant third at 17%. In 2012, Obama was the incumbent and won with 81% of the vote. In 2016, Bernie Sanders won the New Hampshire primary with 60% of the vote. Pretty big win over Hillary Clinton, who only got 38% of the vote. Bernie Sanders is from neighboring Vermont, so not sure how much his proximity to New Hampshire helped him, but he obviously had a lot of support there. And then in 2020, Bernie won again, but it was a much more crowded field this time around. Bernie got 26% of the vote. Pete Buttigieg got 24%. Amy Klobuchar, 20%. Elizabeth Warren, 9%. And Joe Biden, the eventual nominee, actually only got 8% of the vote. So I guess that's evidence that it doesn't always matter how well you finish in New Hampshire as it pertains to ultimately getting the nomination. But let's look real quick at the Republican past winners. In 1992, George H.W. Bush was the incumbent, and he actually only got 53% of the votes. Pat Buchanan challenged him and ended up getting 38% of the vote. And George H.W. Bush ultimately lost out on a second term to Bill Clinton in the general election. So 1996, Pat Buchanan ended up winning the New Hampshire primary, but Bob Dole was a close second. Buchanan got 27%, Dole got 26%, and Lamar Alexander actually a close third at 23%. bunch of other candidates finished behind them, I should say. But yeah, Bob Dole, the second place winner, ultimately got the nomination in '96. And Clinton won re-election, so it was another pretty wide open primary in 2000. John McCain actually won the New Hampshire primary with 49% of the vote. And the eventual winner, George W. Bush, came in second at 30%. No one else really finished all that close. George W. Bush won as the incumbent in 2004, and he ultimately won a second term. In 2008, John McCain won the primary again, on his way to winning the nomination this time around. Mitt Romney came in second at 32%, and Mike Huckabee and Rudy Giuliani and Ron Paul came in distant thirds, fourths, and fifths. In 2012, Mitt Romney won the nomination and also won the New Hampshire primary with 39%. Another candidate from a neighboring state, Romney was the former governor of Massachusetts. Ron Paul actually came in second with 23%. John Huntsman third with 17%. And in 2016, Donald Trump got 35%, John Kasich 16%, Ted Cruz 12%, Jeb Bush 11%, and Marco Rubio 11%. And then obviously in 2020, Donald Trump was the incumbent and he won the New Hampshire primary again. So looking ahead to this primary in a couple weeks, I'm only going to do predictions for the Republican side. It will be interesting to see how many Democratic voters write in Joe Biden's name, or if they just check off somebody on the ballot, either maybe Dean Phillips or Marianne Williamson. I don't really see any type of challenge to Joe Biden for the ultimate nomination, unless something happens to his health or something like that. But I think the Republican nomination is the one that actually is somewhat competitive, contrary to what a lot of people seem to think. It seems to be the conventional wisdom that Trump is running away with it. I'm not quite that convinced of that. At least in New Hampshire, I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people think. My prediction is that Trump will win the New Hampshire primary with 39% of the vote. But I do think that Nikki Haley is going to be a close second at around 37%. I think from there it's going to be a lot of distant thirds and fourths and fifths. Chris Christie, I think, will get around 11%. DeSantis will get around 9%. Vivek Ramaswamy will get maybe 3%. And all others will get around 1%. So we'll see. Maybe I'm way off base here, but I think Nikki Haley is gaining some momentum, and I think she's going to surprise a lot of people with how she finishes in New Hampshire. So yeah, it will be interesting to follow regardless of the outcome. And I thank everybody for listening, and I encourage to register to vote wherever you live and participate in the democratic process. I think that's very important, regardless of your political affiliation. I hope you exercise your right as a citizen to vote. So thanks so much for listening. I will be back later this week with another one of my NFL videos. And I hope everyone has a good night and a good rest of your week. Bye-bye.